Hey everybody, today we are going to be talking about most overrated directors and why we feel that way. Obviously this is one of those hot take, hot topic type of videos, but really for me it's more about trying to open up the discussion a little bit more, and I always preface that every time I do one of these overrated, underrated videos. I always love it when I'm really a big fan of somebody and then somebody else just trashes them, and they do it in a really eloquent sort of way, and then it forces me to think about why I like that person, that artist, for whatever reason. So figured we'd do the same thing here, or try to. And I've done a lot of videos like this in the past, so if there's like some big director or something that I've missed, I've probably already covered it on another video. The Daniels, their juxtaposition of absurd humor and sentimentality doesn't work for me. Also in an interview they stated that over-the-top classical music playing over a scene or a farting corpse flying in the air is inherently funny. That explains perfectly why I don't care for their style at all. Well, I mean, I think that's the movie that they're talking about, Swiss Army Man, which I actually do think is a really interesting idea. The Daniels are very quirky, and when they can take the quirks and spin them into gold, I think that's really fantastic, but I don't think that they really did that in particular with Everything Everywhere All at Once. I really struggle with that film. I don't dislike it, but I have a lot of issues with it, and I really feel like it was one of those movies that it just felt like it was slipping through your fingers. It really, really struggled to find the places of tension and the places to slow down. It felt very, very heavy-handed lecture-y. It was one of those movies, and that's my problem with the Daniels. They remind me, and this is just my opinion, but they remind me of like college students that maybe tried LSD for the very first time, and they started listening to like Tool or something, maybe 10 years after everybody else, and now they think that they've discovered, you know, everything about the world and multiverses and all these metaphors, and I'm like, it's very kind of basic, very like Academia 101, and it's not something that you should necessarily strive for. I think these guys are the kinds of people that, again, yes, they feel like when they arrive at an idea, they'd rather not kind of cleverly embed it into the story. They have to announce it. They have to talk to you about all that they've learned in a way that feels like, look how insightful we are. I could be so wrong on that film, but I just do not see it holding up. I don't see it holding up well at all. Brian De Palma. The man knows his way around a camera, but he hasn't had an original thought. He visually rips off Hitchcock and other filmmakers, and people call it an homage. But if you aren't doing anything new besides moving a scene from shower to an elevator, etc., it's just stealing. The tone of Scarface is all over the place, and Pacino's performance is so over the top and laughable. Margot Kidder is awful in Sisters, and her accent is atrocious. His filmography has more forgettable films than noteworthy ones: Mission to Mars, The Bonfire, The Vanities, Wise Guys. His use of split screen was interesting at first, but became overused. There is a reason he hasn't made a film people have watched since 1996's Mission Impossible, which was dull. I've never understood the praise he gets. Okay. Obviously, I love Brian De Palma. He's one of my favorite filmmakers, so we strongly disagree. But that said, there are things that you're saying in there that I can absolutely agree with. I mean, I think he is a director like Sophia, or sorry, not Sophia Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola, or like a Oliver Stone, we'll say, or even a Ridley Scott, where it's like they haven't made that many good movies in a very, very long time. Some of them, it's been 20 years, 30 years even. But I think with Brian De Palma, yes, he's a postmodern director, and so he is somebody that, yes, is quite literally stealing from other filmmakers from the past, but I think that he's doing something really interesting with it. Whenever I think about Brian De Palma, I think about like, it's like watching some sort of weird Technicolor world, but like with VHS tape tracking. At least that's the sense I get with a movie maybe like Scarface. I think that's the perfect image. Or like an MGM billboard that's been like rotting. It's like melting in the sun and peeling. There's just something faux about it, something that's a little ugly, but all of that I do think is by design. There is a tart sourness that when it's really working, that edge can be very appealing in a unique way. And when it's not working, yeah, it just feels like a very basic kind of cut and paste type of pastiche. I think the trashiness is why I love him, and I think it's totally by design. It is very reminiscent of like a Douglas Sirk, we'll say, from like the 1950s and the 60s. So it's a very aware of that like kitschy melodrama type of packaging. But I do think also when he's really good, he's bringing a special type of emotion to that pastiche filmmaking. Just look at a movie like Carrie, which I think came out in like 1976, something like that. I love that movie. It's one of my favorite horror films of all time. And to me, that film has absolutely everything. Yes, it is artificial. Yes, you're always aware you're watching a movie. It is cynical. It is funny. It's surreal and also really, really tragic and alarming. But I think those elements are working together to make a deeper point about human interaction. And I think ultimately that movie is painfully human and vulnerable. And again, you know, those are the things that I love about Brian De Palma, when he can bring that out. You also mentioned Scarface, and that's a movie that I don't love it. I don't think it's a masterpiece like a lot of people do, but I really like it. I'm not sure what you mean by it being tonally all over the place. I think it's actually very visually focused and very thematically focused and all of that. It's very, you know, like I said before, it's like Cinerama, old school, nostalgia with the trashiness of the 1980s zeitgeist. I love Pacino in the film. Why you dislike him, again, is the reason that I love him. So again, I think it just depends on how you see the director so far as how self-aware they are. Al Pacino is playing Tony Montana not as a fully fledged character, but he is playing him as an empty shell. He is playing him as an idea. It's meant to be very Cagney-esque. It's almost like a second, third-rate kind of wise guy that you might have seen in a movie in the 1930s, especially like the pre-code movies. And think about somebody like Paul Mooney. But he's having fun with it. There is a joy to it. And while, yes, it is meant to be old school in style, there's something that is very refreshing about it at the same time. He's very immediate, and I love that. So for me, he's always exciting. But I do prefer the original 1932 Scarface, for sure. I think thematically it's more interesting. I think the characters are more interesting. But that said, I think that the De Palma one has a lot to offer as well. Baz Luhrmann, Baz Luhrmann, Baz Luhrmann. This guy was a judge on So You Think You Can Dance. I've seen most of his films, and nothing has ever struck me as cinematic genius. His movies are bombastic, CGI-filled affairs that are, for some reason, considered indie masterworks, when in fact they are mainstream write-offs in disguise. Indie masterworks. I don't know if I quite agree with that. But I will say that Baz Luhrmann has enjoyed a certain level of accessibility, we'll say, in his career. And I can understand that. There is something to the gaudiness. There's something to just, it's vulgar, really, I think, his movies. But there's a camp factor to it that I think a lot of people see as very kind of guilty pleasure-y. There's something to those old kind of production numbers, as big as they can be. You know, we do kind of fall for them ultimately because they are very cinematic as an experience. He's never been somebody that I loved, but I mean, there are things about his work that I can kind of admire. I remember when I was younger, I did really love Romeo plus Juliet. Of course, I was maybe like 14, 15 when I was watching it at the time. But yeah, you know, that spoke to me, I think, for the time. I never was a fan of Moulin Rouge just because I'm such a musical purist. You guys know that. But I did watch it not that long ago, and I was on acid. And fuck. Now, it's the drugs talking, obviously, but the style of it, even though, yes, it is very early 2000s, it had a movement and a rhythm to it that was really exciting. And it's like very visually just like, it's really going for it. And it does have that kind of psychedelic feel to it. I have to say, even though I'm not a big fan of like the jukebox musicals that are rehashing songs that we've already heard before, not a big fan of that at all. But here, you know, there was just something to the style of it. I felt like really went there. And I think just so far as everything I've seen him do, that was one of his more pronounced works. But yeah, I do think he has a lack of taste. And I think that's what keeps him from being one of the really great musical directors. And I don't think we'll ever be talking about him the same way we talk about somebody like Busby Berkeley. Definitely not. And quite frankly, I do think that Baz Luhrmann, to a degree, I think he'd be a better stage choreographer. He'd do better doing stage productions and that sort of thing rather than doing the big movies. There's just something, I think when he's not working, there's something about it that registers as flat. A lot of the humor doesn't carry over. I did kind of go back and watch a couple scenes from the Great Gatsby. And I was watching some of the party scenes, and I was really shocked at how poorly they were shot overall. There was an aimlessness, it felt like, just in terms of the frenzy. It felt like it was frenzied just for the sake of being frenzied in style. And I actually think being a judge on So You Think You Could Dance is absolutely perfect for somebody like Baz Luhrmann. Really, I think that it's a very cheesy type of show. It's like the perfect place to get his types of opinions. Or, again, as I've always called him, Spaz Luhrmann. The Lumiere Brothers, all they did was film a train for a minute. What's the big deal? And that's a good one. And if you guys don't know the Lumiere Brothers, look them up. Jordan Peele's films are wildly overrated, and they go so sharply downhill after Get Out, which is nothing but a heavy-handed, easily solved update of the Stepford Wives. Us's ideas of doppelgangers is not bad, but the story that unfolds is ridiculous. Nope is just awful. Indifferent and or annoying acting, a major plot thread that added nothing but time, and the biggest mystery is why so many people go missing. No police investigation. Talented man, but he needs a writing partner to point out when he bites off more than he can chew. His ideas are simple ones that he makes far too convoluted. Yeah. And I've talked about Jordan Peele a lot. I feel like I talk about him and I have a lot of criticisms about him, and I'm sorry, but I'm going to talk about him again. Yeah, so I actually went back and watched Get Out not that long ago, and not the whole thing, but I watched a good chunk of it, and I really, really, really struggled with it. Sorry, I do not understand why people think it's a masterpiece. I think it is one of the most, it's very literal. It is so, all of the humor, all of the horror, all of the metaphors are so on the surface and not in like a fun kind of, like you mentioned, Stepford vibes, not in a fun sort of way, in a way that just feels so heavy-handed and so basic. I'm just shocked by how uninspired everything is visually in terms of the characters. Now, I will say, and I've said this before, if there's one thing that Get Out really has going for it, it's how intact the story is. It's very focused. It's structured really, really well, and that's something that we don't see very often, where like all three acts actually work together. But at the same time, when you look at it, I also find it to be kind of ridiculous at the same time, especially when you look at the climax and everything. When you find out, the white characters in the movie, the antagonists, it's out of jealousy because they wish they had a lot of the characteristics of African Americans. And I was like, what? That just, okay, whatever. Now again, just if you want to use that as a device, it does hold everything intact. It's just, it feels very silly to me. And I'm just not sure how much of that they really believe and how much of it is like satirical. But you never know, man. Sometimes, a movie can be a sleeper hit, a movie can come out of nowhere and become just a smash. And that was the case with this one. But when that happens, it's like you've got to feel bad for the director at the same time. And I did feel bad for Jordan Peele because it's like, it's the first movie he's made. Just let him breathe. Let him make another one before you guys decide that he's going to be our #1 African-American auteur. He's going to be the next Spike Lee or whatever. I think there's just such a desperation in Hollywood to have these auteur voices that the moment we think we've found one, it's like we're trying to build them into that same formula. And I just don't think that's fair to the filmmaker. It's definitely not fair to Jordan Peele. And I feel like it's sad because it's almost like he has no choice but to lean into that. So it's like now every time he's on a red carpet, he's wearing these like ridiculous, like tweed suits and everything, like multicolored sweaters. And it's very like, yes, I'm the new Spike Lee. And it's just real cringe, real pretentious. But we have set him to a ridiculous standard. And then Us came out. And while visually, I think just in terms of the imagery and the way it was made, it was so much better than Get Out. In my opinion, I was like, wow, there's so many things that were actually eerie, actually creepy. But as you say, it's like the story itself completely falls apart. So it's like everything that Get Out held intact. Then you get to Us, and it's like, I think Jordan, he's a little flustered. As you said, with a lot of the ideas that are bouncing around, it's going to get convoluted, and that's what's happening with Us. Now, Nope, I only saw one time, and I could see that there was very strong filmmaking, of course. Like I said, Jordan Peele has a great eye. But I don't know, just when I look at it now, it definitely didn't hold up for very long. In the months afterwards, I kind of thought to myself, oh, that was kind of a convoluted mess, wasn't it? Now, again, there are some people that think it's a masterpiece, so I may just need to see it again. But based on what you are saying, it's exactly how I remember it. It's like some really strong elements, but it's all over the place. And again, I just feel like Jordan Peele is very flustered. It's like, okay, he's going with this like, Spielbergian Close Encounters of a Third Kind type of thing, but it's like, oh, we have to make it all about the cult of personality and politics, racism, all this types of stuff. And I wish he would just forget about that for a little bit, just kind of strip it back and go for more kind of simple tension building. I think as a director, just make a movie that you wish you could see that's not being made. It's like, man, I wish more movies like this were being made. Well, then go make them. And I feel like Jordan Peele is making the types of movies he thinks people should watch, like it'll be good for them, like they're getting all of this nutritional value, but are they really? I kind of beg to differ. Sophia Coppola, I understand art imitates reality, but how many films are you going to make about the plight of being a rich white chick? I don't really have a problem with that, and I really don't see that as a very interesting criticism, just because it's like you could say the same thing about, I don't know, David Fincher. It's like, when are you going to make a movie that's like not about an assassin? Or when are you going to make a movie that doesn't involve some sort of crime, mystery, thriller sort of angle? You could say the same thing about like Martin Scorsese and making movies about underground crime and, wise guys, that sort of thing. You could say that about a lot of different people. Sophia is just writing from her experience, and her experience is being somebody who, yes, she's the daughter of one of the great filmmakers in the world, not just an American film, in the world. And so naturally, she's been quite out of touch. That is her experience. And yeah, sometimes I don't think that her films always land. I actually do think a lot of times she's a little pulled back. She's a little hard to get to know as a director. There is a coldness where I wish we could find some heat from her and get some more emotional vulnerability within her visual imagery. I think would be very interesting. But when she does well, she does really, really, really well. And, as an example, I watched in preparation for Priscilla, I watched Marie Antoinette, and I just fell in love with it. I thought it was charming, absolutely wonderful. A film that, you know, a lot of people didn't love it when it first came out. They did see it to be just, you know, style over substance. And yes, there's an element of style over substance, absolutely. And yet it worked in this really intimate, powerful sort of way. It had a cheekiness to it, but this deep melancholy. And I love the idea that, yes, it's not about anything, you know, it's about like a Paris Hilton type or a Kim Kardashian type, somebody who they can't help the situation that they're in. They're just rich, they have a lot of clothes, they live in these big fancy palaces or whatever, but there is also kind of a melancholy to that, an emptiness and a lack of purpose for the person. So I actually think that when she makes good films, or like when she's at her best, she really creates some tangibility in the female experience. And you don't necessarily have to relate to it. I certainly can't relate to her experience, like the nepotism and all of that, and yet it's like I can still weirdly relate to Marie Antoinette in that film because there's such a feminine quality to it. It has a feeling of, yes, coming of age. But I also think that the problem with Sophia is she only writes what she knows to the point where she avoids things that I think would be very interesting if she had the balls to tackle them. So, you know, it's kind of an uneven sort of mixed feeling that I have for her. But I am always intrigued by Sophia. I have been ever since I was a kid. So those are a few of your overrated directors. Thank you guys so much for writing in. We will do another one of these at some point. But that is the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm going to plug my website as always. It is deepfocuslens.com. I'm an artist. I do commissioned portraits and I sell prints of my work. If that's something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. Also, I'd like to give a shout out to my patrons who are great. Guys, thank you so much for your support. Welcome to all the new members. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.